I'll get started then. So we've seen talks on heat and on wind. This is more about fire, which of course can involve both of those other hazards. There's a lot of people who have been involved in this work. I'm just skimming along the surface with it, but there are many people who have done a lot of work on many aspects of the system. It's a very complex and comprehensive system compared to what Australia has at the moment. I won't go into the names of everyone, but just to point out that I'm a very small cog in a very large machine. So what I'll talk about today is the fire danger rating system, the Australian fire danger rating system, and why it's important that we implement it, how the thing is structured, where we've got to with its implementation. This is a process of development at the moment, and it won't be implemented operationally for a couple of years yet. And then look at some of the challenges for the future. And all of those things involve, to some extent or another, the value chain of forecasts and warnings. At the moment in Australia, we use, over most of the landmass of the country, a system called the MacArthur forest or grass system, which is or was developed in the 1950s and 60s. So it's quite venerable. It's been around for a very long time. It's not really amenable to incremental improvement, which is it's a problem. So it's frozen in basically the 1960s, so pre-computer, pre-gridded landscape scale data sets and pre-numerical weather prediction, pre-satellite. So it is in need of a substantial revamp, but we can't do that within the framework of the current system. So a new system was discussed over a very long time, but there are various challenges in implementing it, not the least of them the fact that there are a number of jurisdictions around Australia that have a say and a desire to shape things to suit their needs. And so it took a long time, and the impetus of a major fire, the Black Saturday fires in Victoria, to really focus people's attention on getting a new system. The AFDRS incorporates a lot of new science, all of the fire behaviour models for different types of vegetation that are applicable to Australia, not just dry forest, which is the MacArthur system, or rangeland grass, which is what the grass fire danger system is based on in MacArthur. There are actually 5 different types of grass in the new system, and we'll see some details of that in a second. It also includes indices for important quantities or considerations that haven't been dealt with in the past. So indices for potential for ignition, the capacity for suppression, how many of your resources are already tied up facing other fires? Is there access to the sites where fires have started? Are they in remote areas, or are they at the edge of a suburb? And that last question then introduces the final index, which is the impact index, which has been developed over the course of the project, and these 3 impact indices are just about to be implemented in a trial format. But the impact index is basically looking at the sorts of things that Harold was discussing a moment ago, and is very much tied in with the, if you like, the value chain of the forecast and warning system. It's all very well issuing a forecast, but you need to know what sort of effect the hazard or the weather that you're forecasting is going to have on the community. And this impact index attempts to quantify that at a basic level. One of the features of the AFDRS that I've mentioned is that it's modular, so you can, in principle, and has happened in practice with the prototype, the development system, you can take out old parts and put in new parts, which is why we've introduced, if you like, quite simple ignition suppression impact indices, because as the science advances, they can be replaced. The final part of the system, and again tightly tied into it, the value chain, if you like, is that there's been a lot of social science research done around fire dangers and their understanding in Australia in order to best craft a new system that will be meaningful to people. So the social science research that was done was actually the third largest social science work that has been undertaken in Australia, and it's been instrumental in crafting the nature of the system as it will be seen by the public. So all of this means that, of course, a system like this is necessarily multidisciplinary. It involves meteorologists, fire ecologists, the interaction of fire and atmosphere, and of course, as I mentioned, the social science. And it's involved the interactions, very close interactions between the Bureau and the fire agencies, and of course, between both of those, if you like, government instruments and the broader community. At a high level, the technical part of the project is fairly simple. It involves incorporating observations of where the fuels are, the vegetation is at the moment, into the machinery to do the calculations. And the Bureau is doing the calculations for this work, as it has done for many decades, actually, calculations of fire danger. That will continue. And so we're setting up to do the machinery that will give us fire danger indices. We're also introducing a climate module, which will produce estimates of the fire danger for the sub-seasonal to seasonal timescale. So 2 to 3 weeks, 3 to 4 weeks, 1 to 3 months in the future, which is a new feature of fire danger forecasting in Australia, and in terms of its quantity and its update cycle, is probably fairly up there in terms of where agencies around the world are doing this sort of work. So we plan to update the climate module at least weekly, and potentially a couple of times a week. In theory, we could do it every day, but we figure that's probably slightly overkill for that timescale. Finally, there's a fire weather viewer, which will allow people to slice and dice the data as it comes out, because different users, different agency staff will need to look at the data in different ways. And so the fire weather viewer, which is being developed by a third party, will account for all of those different requirements. So what actually is the fire danger rating system after all that? Well, as I said, it's fairly complicated. There's a lot to it. On a landscape scale, it requires spatial data at 1.5 kilometres across Australia, and that's a compromise between the scale of the meteorology, which we're able to provide, which is, depending where you are in Australia, around 3 or 6 kilometres, and the scale of the vegetation data, which is at tens of metres across that same landscape. It involves the first coherent and cohesive vegetation map for the whole country. Each of the different jurisdictions and states within Australia has had their own separately structured vegetation maps in the past. Now we've got a comprehensive national one, and of course it involves the weather data, the estimation of the fire behaviour from each of those different, the way the fuel types interact with the weather, definitions of how fires behave in those different fuel types, and the development of categories of fire danger. So we'll have a little bit of a look at that in a minute. Once you have all of those different components combined, then a forecast and if necessary warning is issued, and the system, if you like, repeats its development as we understand how people interpret it as the science improves, as I mentioned before. So there's a lot going on in the project and within the fire danger rating system itself. So just to zero in on a couple of key steps here, we specify the fuel. As I mentioned before, there are 8 major fuel types. They're separated into a couple of dozen different variations, and finally accounting for local climate and local vegetation development, there's something like 400 odd variations, parameterizations of the fuel. So it's a much more expansive and comprehensive system than the 2 options that existed with the MacArthur system, or exist still with the MacArthur system. The rating scale itself is very much an impact-based system, as somebody pointed out a couple of weeks to me. It ranges from mostly self-extinguishing fires, where it's difficult to get a fire going, through to something that is essentially a catastrophe. It's impossible to control a fire at Category 6, and the work of fire agencies is to attempt to keep the community safe and to fall back to safe locations, and of course a range of ratings in between, which are configured for each of the different fuel types, or each of the different major fuel types. So the forecasts are constructed. An index value is created or calculated for each 1.5 kilometre grid square. Those are changed to ratings. The ratings are aggregated over districts or fire weather areas, and then forecasts are generated. They include some red flags, key characteristics that aren't incorporated into the rating itself, so indications of the potential for spotting of fires, for the occurrence of wind changes, which are often dangerous in Australia in particular, and the sea haze, which talks about the stability or instability of the atmosphere. In terms of where we are, we've created this new system. It's a prototype at the moment. The operationalisation is being built. There are some publications in preparation for documenting the system in the peer-reviewed literature. This is something that the fire agencies are very keen on, because it gives them defensibility in the event of legal proceedings or coronial inquiries and so on. It's being refined, as I said before, and the social research is being developed to guide the public messaging. The implementation itself will occur next fire season, so 2021 into 2022, and then the following season the system will become operational. So there's a way to go yet. In terms of some of the challenges and opportunities that we've got, the way fuel's characterised, the way vegetation's characterised is quite difficult, as you can imagine. With 400 odd different fuel types, it's not an easy task. We can extend the nature of these red flags that I introduced before in several different directions on the basis of current research. We want to further develop the sub-seasonal to seasonal timescale work, which is quite exciting and full of its own challenges, of course. And we want to introduce an ensemble forecasting capacity with the system so that we can better characterise the uncertainty, which of course will lead into better characterisation of things like impacts and suppression capability and so on. We've also got challenges, of course, with agency and public uptake. The system that we're currently using has been in place for half a century. It's rusted on in a sense, and people know how to use it, understand its idiosyncrasies and failings, but we'll have to completely relearn how they interpret forecasts and warnings as a consequence of the introduction of the new system, which is no small task in its own right, of course. So finally, what we've looked at is a very brief and superficial overview of what the fire danger rating system is and the reasons we're implementing it, some of the structure of the new system, where we're currently sitting with its introduction, and briefly some of the challenges and opportunities. And I think my time is just about up.
Thank you, Paul. Does anyone have any questions? John, I see you've got your hand up.
Yeah, no, thank you. Paul,
Yes, John.
I'm left wondering if someone got a bell running.
Oh, sorry.
So, sorry, John, I muted everybody, and now I need to unmute you. You need to unmute.
Okay, I'm off.
Apologies.
No, that's okay. So, Paul, the fire weather warnings then that the Bureau does that continue under this paradigm where we do the new Australian fire danger rating system? Because our partners do fire weather, they do warnings as well for foregoing fires. Are we still doing warnings, and is there any conflict seen there because we're about to move across to the same type of warning system that they use?
It's a very interesting and curly question, John. The Bureau has a requirement under the Meteorology Act to warn of dangerous weather conditions, which explicitly includes bushfires. So we have to address that, but we of course also recognise that the potential for two different, effectively, warnings from two different agencies.
That they're in different timescales, aren't they? Because one is preceding the fire actually starting and being present in the landscape, and the other one is there is a fire going. It raises a fundamental question to me about the Bureau proposing to go to the same warning system that our emergency services partners use, because we're trying to anticipate events going, but they currently use the warning system for an event that is occurring.
Yes,
and I wonder if there is a conflict across the entire warning spectrum there in terms of an agency that wants to anticipate the risk compared to a risk manifest by an event running in the landscape.
Yes, yeah. Look, I think this is something that has obviously been discussed. We haven't completely resolved it yet, but it will require some very careful negotiation, but also warning structure so that it's clear that we're warning of the potential for dangerous fires, whereas, as you say, the agencies are warning of, you've got a fire at the end of your street, it's too late to leave now, that sort of difference, and it's not obvious at the moment from the research that's been done that people understand the difference between those things. So it will require some very careful crafting.
Are there other questions? All right.